The Darkest Minds is the latest film based off of a YA novel, and this film is about when a group of executives over at 20th Century Fox, soon to be owned by Disney, said, well, how can we bring the YA novel trend back? We just wrapped up with The Maze Runner, so how can we bring that back? Well, there's this one property called The Darkest Minds where they have superpowers. It's basically the same exact kind of world as a Divergent, a Hunger Games, Fifth Wave, but they have superpowers this time, so it's different, and so they decided to just make it. And then for some reason they listed Jennifer Yuen Nelson as the director, even though this felt like some amateur off of the street made it. 20th Century Fox actually has a history with making YA novel films. They started off with Aragon, moved on with the Percy Jackson movies, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, the Maze Runner trilogy, Fault in Our Stars, Love, Simon, which came out earlier this year, review coming soon. They have a pretty long history of making these kinds of films, so it came to no surprise to me when I heard, like, oh, they're making another one here, makes sense, Maze Runner just wrapped up, they want to try to make more money off of the YA trend that's kind of been dead now, but this film is kind of an attempt to bring it back. But my main interest in this film, besides the mediocre trailers that came out, was just that it was directed by Jennifer Yuen Nelson, who previously directed Kung Fu Pandas 2 and 3. Two films that I think are actually pretty great for animated features and for sequels. They're actually pretty strong. So I was really excited to see what kind of approach she was going to take with this film, and unfortunately, it just feels like exactly what you'd expect it to be. It's a very typical YA novel film that just follows a lot of the same cliches that we've seen before. You have this post-apocalyptic world, a bunch of children who don't have this peculiar disease are dying, and the children that are left with this disease are superpowered, basically, but none of the adults are seen dying. We don't really get to understand why only adults live, but then there are certain children that die. Like, that's never explained. Maybe they wanted to save that for the sequel. That's never happening. There's different groups that these kids with powers are placed into, kind of like the factions in the Divergent movies and the Hunger Games, except this one it's like if you're blue you have telekinesis, green super smart, red is fire, and orange is basically like you're a god, and our lead character has the orange, which is very rare, so she's basically the chosen one kind of figure that we've seen before. There's also a growing war between this rebellion, like this children's league, and then also the main government that's keeping children in these camps, like in the Fifth Wave when they kept children with them to train them up. And then there's also a bland romance going on between our main character and this other dude. So there's a ton of cliches in this film. I could literally spend an hour just going through the movie and pinpointing every single thing that we've seen before, but that would really take too long because there's just so much here that we've already seen before. But what I really liked about this movie, if I had to talk about positives, is that there was a moment in this film where I saw a little bit of potential. I was watching our four characters, Ruby, Liam, Zoo, and Chubbs, all in this van, and I was watching them and I was like, you know what, these guys, whenever they're talking amongst themselves, there's a spark of life here. Like, there's a lot of potential here for like an ensemble picture. Like, instead of having it just focus on Ruby and seeing her just eventually meet up with Liam and Chubbs and Zoo, how about we open the movie with their subplot and then we cut to Ruby, then we cut back to them, cut back to Ruby, then eventually they intertwine and the rest of the movie is about them. How come we just have to focus on Ruby? Because I'm just gonna be honest here, Amanda Steinberg does a fine job in the role, like she's fine and all. I just don't understand why they had to make her the main character. Because this film being centered exactly on her, the film opens up in a very cliched way. She's narrating and explaining everything, and we see her going to the camps. We don't spend a lot of time at the camps, but we do see her going there, and she's still explaining it through narration, what exactly is going on. And I think this movie would have worked out better if the movie opened up without any narration, if we just got visual footage of like what's going on, and then the movie opens up with Chubbs and Liam, our other two characters, and we see them bond, maybe meet the little girl Zoo that they eventually find, and then we cut back to Ruby, we see her in a camp, then we cut back to these other guys having their adventure, then we see Ruby breaking out of the camp with Mandy Moore, and then seeing how these guys meet up later. Like, I think that would have made it a little bit more interesting. We're not focusing on the government cliche stuff entirely, we're also focusing on these kids growing a bond with each other and then eventually finding someone else and continuing to grow bonds. Because whenever the movie focuses up on just the four of them on screen, it's actually pretty good, but then whenever the plot comes in, it's like, now the the good life is going away and we have to go through this cliched plot again. And it's not like the acting is really elevating the material that much either. Like, the actors are doing fine for what they're given, which is why I also think the writing could have been a little bit better for this film also. And I can understand book purists being like, oh, but that would be changing the novel way too much and we can't have that. I get that, but since movies and books are different mediums, you shouldn't have to read a book just so you can watch the film version of it. Like, I think you have enough room to change certain things. I will say though, the one actor in this film that I think had a lot of life to him, a lot of charisma, is Chubbs. Skyland Brooks is the name of the guy, and he did a very good job here. He actually worked with what he was given, but also added a little bit more to his character through his performance. He's definitely the most interesting guy out of anything. And by the time this film wrapped up, even though I was aware that this film is never getting a sequel, I was like, well, what happened to Chubbs though? I really want to know what happens to Chubbs next. The other actors, Amanda Steinberg, Harris Dickinson, who plays Liam, like, they're fine and all, but they aren't really elevating it like Skyland Brooks was as Chubbs, and even their romance feels very forced. It was very weird too, because you go from one scene where they're bickering in a car about what's going on in the world and all this, but then the very next scene, all of a sudden Liam starts acting awkward with her, like, oh, I brought you these pairs of socks, because if you don't have them, you'll die. Like it's the kind of like cringy, like awkward romance stuff where they're like trying to talk, but like, oh, I feel so awkward near you, like that kind of dialogue. But they just got done with the scene where they were like bickering so much, so why the sudden change? You don't really feel their romance at all, even though the actors are doing fine, but it's just not believable, and it just kind of feels like we need the romance. We got to have the romance in this film. We gotta cram everything in as much as possible, which leads to another flaw of mine. Once again, if this is all in the book, if everything that happened in the movie is exactly how it happens in the book, okay, they adapted the book well, I guess. But it feels like a lot of stuff is going on for their considerably short runtime. It's got a very quick pace to it. The movie's never boring, I'll give it that. But the characters are just hopping from place to place to place to place. And I was like, can we slow down for just a second? Can we build up our characters a little bit more instead of just constantly throwing them into these situations all the time? Like, there's a moment in this film where I was like, this honestly feels like a second film just condensed into the third act. Like, it honestly did feel like that, and I was just really confused as to why everything had to be crammed in. And like I said earlier, if it's in the book, that's fine, but once again, this is a movie, a different medium. How about we stretch things out, maybe just leave certain things in this one film? Mandy Moore shows up for a little bit, and I was a little disappointed in her amount of screen time. I really like her as an actress, but here it's just like she's kind of wasted. Same with Bradley Whitford. When he was the president in this movie, I was like, okay, this could be really good. He's a really good actor. Let's see what he has to do. Maybe he can be the next President Snow. And no, it's like someone watched The West Wing and was like, hey, you were on that political show on HBO, right? Well, how about we make you a cameo as the president in our film? We probably won't get a sequel, so it's not like you have to come back for anything. Just show up for one day. And that's kind of how it happened. Like, you watch the movie and like, yeah, I can see that literally being the only reason why he's here. However, I don't want to hear anyone complain about Gwendolyn Christie's role in Star Wars anymore, because this movie takes the cake for wasting her talents as an actress. She is literally only in the movie for like a solid, 2 minutes at best? And the way they write her out of the film too, it's not like they're actually going to bring her back for the sequel, because it's not happening, like in the Star Wars movies. Like, the way they write her out of the film, it's hilariously dumb. It's like, so no one can complain about Captain Phasma anymore. This takes the cake for wasted talent of Gwendolyn Christie. I was just watching this movie and I was just really disappointed that you have this great cast of people, and some of them are wasted, some of them aren't really elevating the material, and they're just giving exactly what you'd expect. Only one of them is actually bringing a lot of charisma to the role, and then you have this general guy who's talking like this in every scene, like, look at me. Look at me! We'll see about that. That's how he talks! That's literally how he talks throughout the entire film. He's overacting. And then you have an obvious villain guy where literally one shot they showed of him, and I was like, bad guy, instantly. And then several scenes later, you find out he's the bad guy. It's like, oh, of course. I knew that! It's so obvious! This is one of those movies where I also can't even really recommend it for like any of the action sequences either. Like, they're all pretty bland and over with rather quickly. Like, there's this car chase scene that's pretty dull, literally just cars driving straight and then occasionally bumping into each other, and then you see some CG leaves. Like, that's the gist of that sequence. There's also one at a mall where you think, oh, this is gonna be fun, and then it just kind of ends after 30 seconds, and you're like, oh, okay, well, that could have been cool. You have these people with different powers fighting, but whatever. And then there's also the third act action sequence where you think there's going to be a lot of great stuff, and there really isn't. It's really, like I said, over and done with rather quickly. There's some really great CG flames. Just kidding, they look pretty bad. This movie just feels cheap. It's a $34 million budget too, so that's not technically very cheap. It's not like a $17 million budget, but like, it just feels like there wasn't that much money to this thing. It feels like a Netflix movie, or like a straight to streaming, like a YouTube Red kind of project, honestly. Especially with the way this film wraps up. It literally wraps up with a cliffhanger ending narration. It, of course, ends with the narration of the fight is still going on, but we're growing our forces, and I'm doing this for all of you. We are strong. It's like, boy, like, just settle down a bit. Like, stop trying to have these high ambitions for a franchise, dude. I can't say that I necessarily hated this film. A lot of its cliches and other YA trends in it that made me want to hate it, but I can't hate the main characters. Like, they're fine. It's just I wanted a lot more out of them. Chubbs was the, like, secondary character, but he was actually bringing a lot more than our two romantic leads, honestly. The action sequences felt very dull and not very inspired at all. The visual effects also just aren't that great, aside from just you see the eyes change colors, but a lot of the other stuff doesn't look that good. A lot of its cast talent is wasted. A lot of people aren't really acting the greatest. The villain, the general guy, all these people. I was never bored because this film has a quick pace and there's so much going on, but I was never entertained, and I was never really feeling like I was really invested in this situation. Like, I never really felt like I was interested in what was going on. I was just kind of watching everything, being like, okay, now they're doing this, and now they're doing this, and it really sucks because I could really see this film in particular actually bringing back the YA novel trend. Like, 20th Century Fox maybe could have had a hit if they reworked some of the script. Like, there's a lot of potential here for some good ideas, but they just didn't really seem to go for it because book purists, and they just want to make you feel like you're watching The Fifth Wave and Divergent again. Remember those successful franchises? Oops. I'm gonna give The Darkest Minds a C-. It's a very plain YA movie that could have been much better than it was, but a lot of its cast was wasted. A lot of its directing style is just very plain and boring, which is a surprise to me since Jennifer Young Nelson has proven herself as a very capable director after the Kung Fu Panda 2 and 3 movies. Honestly, I feel bad for anyone who's working on this and betting on that sequel for more work, but I'm glad that 20th Century Fox had a big flop on their hands. It only opened at number 9 at the box office top 10, so no sequel. It's the next fifth wave where we're not getting any more of those. But if you've seen The Darkest Minds, leave in the comments below what you thought of it, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.